Important Civil War events. After the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, Lincoln stated that he could no longer see the United States having half free Americans and half slaves. This posed as a threat to Southern states who continued to heavily rely on slaves. South Carolina seceded from the United States for this reason exactly. Following the secession of South Carolina, many other states followed along. These states formed the Confederate States of America. As you can see to the left in this image, all of the royal blue states were states that seceded before the fall of Fort Sumter. The Confederate States became official in February of 1861, and Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis was elected as provisional president. The Confederate military gained power almost immediately after the secession by taking over as many ports and property in the South as possible. Following the strengthening of the Confederate military, issues with the president and issues with the vice president, tension between everybody grew to a point where it could no longer be contained. On April 12, 1861, battle broke out when arcs exploded over Fort Sumter. After this explosion, the Confederate forces woke up and got to work. The Union was immediately overpowered. For about 36 hours, the Union and Confederate militia fought back and forth, taking turns with attacks. Fire caught in Fort Sumter, and with it, all of the Union's resources went. Due to lack of resources, Robert Anderson surrendered the fort to the Confederacy on behalf of the Union. February in 1862 was an era of success for the Union. By this time, the Union had many victories in Kentucky and in Tennessee as well. This newfound battle confidence inspired the Union Army to make a plan to move southward to capture a Confederate railway hub in Mississippi. General Albert Sidney Johnston, a Confederate general, was already taking precautions and fortified this town in which the hub was located in. The Battle of Shiloh. Going off of this battle confidence, the Union had the plan to make two armies into one and take over the town of Corinth, Mississippi. Under the leadership of Ulysses S. Grant, one Union army decided to set up their camp in Tennessee. Johnston, seeing only one army, decided to attack before other Union forces could attend to help Grant's army. General Albert Sidney Johnston struck Grant's army on April 6, 1862. The Confederate forces were very surprised by the strength of the Union Army, but still fought hard in the field for about a day. General Albert Sidney Johnston was also shot in the leg while rallying up his men and was killed. Following this long day of battle and the death of General Johnston, Don Carlos Buell and his Union Army showed up. After Buell and his men showed up, they united forces with Grant's men. They decided that the next morning their combined forces would attack. They attacked at dawn and brutally wounded the new Confederate General Beauregard. This was a huge victory for the Union because it resulted in the withdrawal of the Confederate militia. The Battle of Antietam-Sharpsburg. Following some of the Union's successes, the Confederacy decided to retaliate and attempt to find successes of their own. With that being said, Confederate General Robert E. Lee wanted to take the battle north. Lee came up with a plan to take his army, divide and conquer, take supplies to Maryland, creep into Pennsylvania, and pose a threat to Washington, D.C. This stealthy plan made its way into the hands and plans of the Union Army. This resulted in the Union Army going to confront the Confederate forces residing in Antietam Creek in Maryland. The Union Army, led by General McClellan, did not jump into battle right away and waited about 18 hours before engaging. This time frame allowed the Confederate troops to bring in reinforcements, ultimately strengthening their troops. The battle soon broke out. General Robert E. Lee's hopes to expand the Confederate Army to the north were crushed when the battle ended in a draw. 23,000 men were killed in this battle, and Lee was able to take his remaining men and escape. Following the escape of Lee and his Confederate forces, President Lincoln became infuriated. Lincoln was mad that General McClellan allowed for Confederate escape, but did find an opportunity to make an announcement. His anger and the current circumstance allowed for Lincoln to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. The Battle of Gettysburg. Although the Battle of Sharpsburg did not end up in the favor of General Robert E. Lee, the Union did not take precautions to make sure his plan was completely stopped. Due to the anger of Lincoln, McClellan was replaced, but the generals who followed him lost many battles. The battles of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and Chancellorsville, Virginia, all ended with Confederate victory. The confidence gained from the victories encouraged Lee to move his forces back towards the north. Lee moved his armies located in northern Virginia northward. In order to protect Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., one of the Union generals, George Meade, followed him. Meade's forces and Lee's forces met in the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on July 1st, 1863. Despite what Lee and the Confederate forces thought, they were not able to get the Union and their forces off of their ground. The next day, both sides had reinforcements within their army, and once again, Confederate forces were not able to overpower the Union army. On July 3rd, 1863, Lee decided to push one last effort on behalf of the Confederacy. This effort is now known as the Pickett's Charge. The Pickett's Charge was an assault of 15,000 Confederate troops up Cemetery Ridge. This attack was able to break Union lines, but the Confederate Army was not able to continue forward and ended up retreating. General Lee expected a retaliation attack back from the Union, but his expectations were never met. This caused Lee to take his forces out of the battle on July 4th. General Meade and his men won the battle and were able to halt the invasion of Lee and his men. General Meade and his men took this as a major win, but they did in fact fail to destroy the remains of General Lee's militia and failed to stop the rebellion. Overall, the Battle of Gettysburg was one of the most gruesome and bloody battles of the Civil War. Around 23,000 people were considered casualties for the Union, and around 28,000 people were considered casualties for the Confederacy. Following this battle, President Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address at the dedication of the military cemetery later in that fall of 1863. References: